Hello everybody, my name is Robert Dodd and I'm making a comic book and I'm going to show you what process I go through to make it so that if you are so inclined you can make one too. If you have a little bit of a drawing experience, just dive into it. Now if you're going to make a full comic book, mine is going to be named Alamos, and it'll be 3 months from now before it is finished. So if you're doing the whole thing yourself and it's a normal comic book sized comic book, it's a bit of an undertaking, but I mean you can always do comic strips and so forth, and you could use the same process I'm doing here to do that. So in commercial world, they have separate people, the division of labor for the comic book process. They have someone who do the original pencil sketch for the pages. They have someone who does the inking of the pages, the contour lines of the pictures, and they have someone who does the color, and then other people down the line. In my case, I'm doing it all. So, but this also gives you a look at the whole process. So, let's get started. Okay, so your basic drawing equipment will be a drawing board is good. And also, if you want to, you can do all of it on a sketch pad, of course. But if you want to do the full deal, you need a drawing board of some kind. You need a T-square. You need some kind of tape that doesn't stick to your artwork. This is painter's tape, and rulers and a triangle thing. That's to make right angles on your T-square. And you will need pencils. Scissors, of course. This is what the fuck? Oh, that's my ruler. This is an art gum eraser. That's the best kind of eraser to use for this. I mean, people have difference of opinions, but they're wrong. This is the one you want, right here. For my pencil work, I just use a number 2 pencil. If I were doing the pencil work itself as a work of art, I would use a softer pencil. Like this is a 8B. Sorry, 6B. That's a softer pencil. That's for actually doing pencil artwork. For doing the pencils for my comic book, I just use regular number 2. Okay, what we start off with here, if you're making like a regular comic book sized comic, is a thumbnail sketch, which is you, sorry, get yourself a regular piece of copy paper like you'd use for your printer, fold it in half, and then cut it along the fold, and that's about the same proportions as your comic book page, and you just do thumbnails of how you're going to do the general layout of the comic book. In my case, I do the layouts really rough. I don't fill them in too much. I just try to get the general proportions of things. As you can see, it's not really a fine work of art here. It's basically just roughing out where I want things. And in fact, when I later do the pencils, I don't fill those in too much either. I do most of my artwork in inks. Well, we call them inks. This is actually digital inks in this case. So this is the first step, which is the thumbnail layout section. Yes. And for which you need all the materials I spoke of earlier. I mean, you can get away with less. You can get away with not having a drafting table and all this. It's just a matter of how much you want to commit to that particular art you are doing. If you are doing this a lot, it was probably a good idea to get a actual drafting table, T-square, non-sticky tape, rulers, triangles, drawing board, and so on. That's just a matter of how much you want to invest in the process. Okay, for doing the pencils as well as for doing the inks, if you're doing hand inking, you're going to want this. Or you're going to want this. This is Bristol board, Bristol paper. It is smooth surface. There's a big white out there. There you go. And I use Strathmore 300 series Bristol. Why do you use Bristol instead of like typing paper? Well, its surface is, as you can see, extremely flat, extremely white, and it holds up to abuse well, and it holds up to erasing well. So that you're getting a big whiteout now, aren't you? Okay. So this is what Nowadays, for most like Marvel and DC comics, they have special boards for stuff, and you can get special boards for either American comics or manga-sized boards. But this works perfectly well, and it's cheap, so I get it. And now you're going to want to make your artwork is considerably size larger than what it's going to actually appear on the page or on the screen if you're doing a webcomic. You're going to want to do your originals a lot larger. Typically, you do it your originals at least half up. That's for instance. So, for instance, if you were to do it, I don't know, 6 inches. If the final artwork is going to be 6 inches across, it'll be 9 inches across in the original pencils and inks. If you're doing hand inks, so you want to do your original art lots larger than you would the final product. Here's a little artwork I did on the page. There we go. So yeah, Bristol board. Back before they had special art boards for people who did comics, this is what they used. Okay, we're going to want a piece for our pencils. That is, this is for American comic book size. Mangas are different. We want a piece of this that is 10 inches wide by 15 inches long. Take it off the pad here. We will set the pad aside. Right here. And this is where things like having a drawing board and a T-square come in handy. So that you have your angles exactly right. I'm going to take my non-sticky tape. You can get stuff that's specially made for this, draft dots and stuff. But painter's tape seems to work okay. And we're going to make sure we got it all squared up on the board. Tape down. And this paper originally is, I can tell you in a second. It is, yeah, scream like a girl. Yes, it is 14 inches by 17 inches. So we'll be cutting a significant amount off this. Let's get our roulette. Our big roulette. Big ruler has a hard time navigating through the minefields here. Let's do it out of the way. Alright, taking my number two pencil, I'm going to mark off 15 here. Make sure your T-square is square. And it's going to go off the side. So we'll ignore the T-square for right now. And 10 inches on this side. 10 inches. Voila, 10 inches. Take our T-square again. I don't know for sure that this drawing board is perfectly square. I assume that it is, but it's not, because it's not actually originally a drawing board. It's actually originally a baker's block, but I assume that it is perfectly square, which is important if you're using the T-square on it. kind of square. Okay, so here we have our 10" by 15". You can do the metrics on that as you wish if you use a metric system. That's our paper that we're going to use to make our pencils on, and inks if you do hand inks. We have some leftover chunks of paper which you can keep for various purposes. You can make paper. They make very good paper airplanes. If you make paper airplanes, this makes awesome paper airplanes. Or you can do little. If you have fans, you can do little fan art for them. You know, send off fan art to contributors or whatever. Just keep it, and it's good. So this is the paper that we are going to actually do our pencils on, and I have some pencils already made up. They are, however, cut up into chunks. I will show you them. I cut these up into chunks because I find it much easier to draw on them in smaller increments. Okay, so here are the pencils for my first page of my comic. Sometimes I do pencils pretty loose, like that. This panel is real loose because I already knew what I was going to do with it. I didn't really need to do anything except lay out the general shapes. Sometimes I do them a little tighter if I need more definition as to what I'm going to do in the inks, and also if I need some definition as far as what I'm going to do with the shading, I do that too. How tight or loose you make your pencils is totally up to you. Just whatever you feel comfortable with. Let's assume for a moment that we are not going to do our inks digitally. I, in fact, do my inks digitally, but other people may not want to. There are people who do their inks in all kinds of things, Sharpies, and such. If you use a regular marker, here's the disadvantage. You're not going to be able to have the changes of line. In other words, you're not going to be able to start a line out real thin and narrow and then make it flare out and then go back to being thin and narrow and stuff. So there are also brush pens available. This is a Sakura Pigma brush pen, like this. And this is a rather expensive Kuretake brush pen. All the instructions for this are in Japanese, but if you wish to, if I were to do my inks manually, or in far as physical art instead of digital art, this is what I would use. Let me see if I can show you some of what the brush pens can do. This is the Kuretake brush pen. So let's start off real easy. You can have your real fine lines, or you can do your real dark lines, whatever you want with this. So, for instance, if you have something that's in bright sunlight or it's far away, you can do a nice thin line. I don't know how well you can see all this. I'll show it to you when it's done. You can do very nice sort of feathering shadings with this as well. It's very nice for that. And if you do any kind of ink, as far as like hand inking your artwork, you must make sure whatever it is a very dark ink. You don't want to mess around with anything that's less than perfectly black. Alright, well that'll give you an idea. I'll give you a better picture here. Here's the disadvantage with using actual physical inks. That is, if you screw up, you're kind of in a world of hurt. This is indelible ink; you can't erase it. So you can use whiteout or other techniques for undoing the inks, but you can't undo physical inks very easily. However, if you do decide to use hand inks, Bristol board is very excellent substrate to work on. It does well with inks. So there's that. However, I do my inks digitally, and that's has some significant advantages as far as being able to undo your fuck ups. Yes. Okay, here's the pencils for the next, the first panel of the next page I'm doing in my comic. I usually do pencils pretty loose. In this case, some of the architectural details, I did the pencils pretty tight. But for the figures, I did them pretty loose because I'm going to be able to do them better when I get them in the computer. And there's a rather strange shape to the panel that's just sometimes it's good to mix up to not just have a bunch of rectangles in your comic, have something that looks a little different. So in this case, this panel is going to have an arc shape, and if you see here on the thumbnail, that's the panel I just worked on. In the middle, it doesn't show here, but there's actually a circle around this dude. So I would decided to put him in a circular shaped panel, and then this will be in reverse down here. So the next step after you get your pencils done, whether you do them tight or whether you do them loose, is to ink, either physically in terms of actual ink, or in my case, digitally. Okay, hopefully my recording software is working correctly now. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about inking and coloring. Now, if you want to do hand art, let's go ahead and turn off some of these layers here. If you want to do like hand art inking, you can use either the classic way is to use Indie ink and like a Winsor & Newton 00 or 01 brush. And ink it that way, or you can use something like a Kirotaki brush pen or a Sakura brush pen, something like that. You can use markers. I personally don't go well with that, but because you can't vary the line very much. But you can do that if you want to. Markers. Lots of people, even famous comic book artists, use markers. So those are options for hand inking. I bought myself a Wacom Intuos tablet. And initially, I didn't think I was even going to use it for the comic. I thought I just wanted to see what it was like.
but now that I've gotten used to using it, I wouldn't use anything else for inking. Because it's very easy, and unlike inking in the on the real paper, you can correct mistakes and so forth. That's what I use myself, is a Wacom Intuos graphics tablet. They're not cheap. Probably depending on which options you get, maybe $200, something like that. They're like Chinese knockoffs that are cheaper. I have not used those, so I could not recommend that. Okay, let me talk to you about them right quick. What you see here is the pencils. Again, hoping that my recording software is recording correctly. Next up is the contour lines. That's basically the outlines of the shapes of the objects. And you can see here, this is what we have. Let's go ahead and turn off our pencils. Next up is shading. Now this is, if you use color, then this kind of shading is not necessary to use. It basically defines shadow and volume. But I use it even though I use color because I like the look of it. So that's why I do that. That's still black and white lines here. That's my shading layer. Now I've got a bunch of color layers on this just because it was convenient for me to do it that way. And you may find it convenient for you to do multiple layers for color. I know I find it useful to do it that way. And so that's the process of inking and coloring your artwork. I'm now going to, again, if my recording software will oblige me, I'm going to go ahead and do a time-lapse video of me inking. Let me close this out right quick. Don't save that. Me inking panel number 1 of page 2 of my comic. That's right here. These are the pencils right here. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And assuming that my software helps me out here, we're going to have a time lapse of that. And then, yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoyed all that. The name of the comic that I'm going to be coming out with in about 3 months or so is named Alamos. Like Los Alamos, except without the Los in front of it. So I hope that this video inspired you to maybe make your own comics. A little bit about the comic I'm making. The premise is basically, well, it's sort of a multi-layered thing, but the basic premise is there's a town in the middle of a restricted military base. And this town is entirely composed of the sort of offshoots of a weird military project to make animals into soldiers. So they're basically like genetically engineered humanoid animals, and they've sort of been dropped off there because the military realized that the American public wasn't going to be okay with this. So they're all just dropped there in this formerly abandoned town in the middle of a restricted military base. And into the middle of all that, a space alien crashes nearby and comes into the town and looking for repairs for his spacecraft and stumbles onto this weird community. And that's the premise. And basically, it's going to be a fairly lighthearted, in a sense, comic book. In other words, it's sort of on a surface layer, it's going to be a comedic in intent. But there's actually a deeper level to that, and you'll have to buy the comic if you want to get into all that. But anyway, that's my comic. It's called Alamos. If you see it out there, or if you get a video from me showing that it's out in the world, I'm going to be selling it through Amazon Createspace. Aside from all that, I hope that if you have artistic inkling, and you can actually make do with relatively. You don't need a huge amount of talent. It's kind of a lie, but it's fun to try anyway. It's a fun thing to make comics. Is a fun thing to do. To make comics seriously is a hell of a lot of work. I mean, it takes in like a normal Marvel or DC comic, it takes like 5 guys just to make the comic. That doesn't mean it doesn't include all the guys on the back end, the printers and all that. My comic's going to be maybe 30 pages long. It's going to take me 3 months to do, if I'm lucky. Doing a serious comic is a difficult thing to undertake. Just do some comic strips or something. If you have an inkling to do that, and show them to your friends. Maybe put out a webcomic, and I hope this video will interest you and all that. And if you have a webcomic out there you want me to see, put a link in the comments, and I will check it out. And that's all for right now. And until next time, hasta la vista. Adios.